Dave, Doc Hallen's been killed.
Doc Hallen, what happened?
It's over at his place. You gotta come now.
Now, wait a minute, Steve. Tell us what happened.
Well, I'm trying to tell you. Now, this thing had killed the doc.
Well, what was it?
Stop with it, kid. But it's kind of like a mass that keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Every one of you watching this screen, look out. Because soon, very soon, the most horrifying monster menace ever conceived will be oozing into this theater. Two teenagers see it first, like a falling star from outer space.
Boy, that was close. Hey, come on. I want to see if I can find it.
An old man finds it, touches it, and this is the shocking result. From then on, there's no stopping the Blob as it spreads from town to town. It's indestructible. It's indescribable. Nothing can stop it.
This town is in danger.
How can it be stopped? Mob hysteria sweeps one city. Before long, the nation, and then the world could fall before the blood-curdling threat of the Blob.
Starring Steve McQueen and a cast of exciting young people.
Hi, everybody, and welcome once again to GeekFest Rants. My name is Carlos Perrone, and joining me today I have Mike Sutton. Say hello, Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Well, as we've done in the past, and this is a kind of like a series that we've been doing lately of special episodes where we try to highlight what would be considered classic sci-fi. And by classic sci-fi, we're not talking about your Star Warses or your, Close Encounters. We're talking about way before that, the beginning of sci-fi, or what some people call the Golden Age.
Golden Age.
The Golden Age of sci-fi.
If you want to call it.
Right. It could be something probably in the 50s or the 60s. I don't know if it can go way back to the 40s. I can imagine it right now, but you never know. There might be one there. But today, we are going to be examining The Blob. Now, which year is this one we're dealing with, Mike? Because there have been a number of Blob-related films. Right.
This is the original 1958, starring Steven McQueen, who was one of his first movies when he was, very young, obviously.
Right. It's funny because this is kind of like... This is a little bit like Jack Nicholson starting in The Raven, and it's like before he was Jack Nicholson, that nobody knew him, he was doing these lower budget films. Same thing with Steve McQueen. He was a young man at the time, even though in the movie, to me, he looks like he's like in his 30s or something, but he's playing like a teenager. I know they're all teenagers. But yeah, it was a little known movie, like you said, Steven McQueen. He wasn't even...
Wasn't Steve McQueen from The Great Escape or Steve McQueen from Bullitt. He was Steven, so you could tell even that shows that it was his younger.
Yes, it's like
role.
It's like Larry Fishburne in Apocalypse Now, who became Lawrence Fishburne down the line. I guess your name changes when you get famous. You can stretch it a little bit,
right?
But anyway, classic sci-fi. What, Mike? Tell me, what are we dealing with here in terms of? We have so many subgenres, and in the past we've examined The Thing from Another World, The Day of the Triffids, and even Kingdom of the Spiders, which I know you wouldn't exactly put it as a classic, but it's one of these all-genre movies that kind of could sneak in there every now and then.
Yeah, that's a cult favorite
of
people.
It's more of a cult thing.
Right. It's not a classic science fiction movie from the 50s with nuclear thing or monsters on the rampage.
That's the thing. Let's talk about the rules again a little bit. What are some of the characteristics of what makes it a classic Golden Age type of sci-fi film?
Well, this is the typical monster on the loose. It's a monster from outer space.
Okay, there you go.
Those are the two things for me that makes it more of the classic type movies. It's not the 50s movies where the atomic bombs had something to do with that created the giant insects.
Mutating an animal or something like that.
But it's a monster on the loose, and the kids are out there, those pesky kids in the movie, as the sergeant basically wanted to call them and arrest them all. And I forgot the sergeant's name already. But that's really what it is. It's the monster on the loose story, and it's outer space.
Now, if you think about it, it kind of goes through these steps or these, I don't know if you want to call them cycles, but it's kind of like, in a way, to me, it almost reminded me of Jaws a little bit. It's kind of like something, it's a normal place, a very typical town of imaginary 50s town, because these towns I don't think exist anymore or maybe they never did exist. I don't know. But they give you all the characters of the introduction, and then little by little, somebody sees something and it's that person trying to convince everybody else of what's happening. And then once that person convinces people of what's happening, how they deal with it. That's kind of how they take you through the whole story. So bring us in through the story in terms of bunch of kids, doing whatever the kids are doing out late at night. They witness something.
Right. It's a meteor crash.
Right.
It opens up. It's the two young teenagers. They're out in the convertible. As I was joking around, going, everybody drove a convertible back in the 50s and 60s.
Well, off the bat, one of the things I noticed that looked to me really good is the fact that it has the feel of a 50s, somewhat cheesy horror movie, but the color to me made it so much better. It's like this movie seems to be like right on the border of traditional 50s horror with a little something a little bit more modern. It's almost like it's starting to tip into slightly more modern times. Not today type of modern times, but I guess, I don't know if you want to say maybe 60s horror. Maybe it's tippy-toeing into the 60s or something like that.
Yeah, I think like you're saying it's gone from the old black and white films now starting to film in color.
Right.
And you can tell that they paid more attention.
And it looks good.
Color.
It's not like you're watching one of these movies where, because most of it takes place at night, the whole movie takes place at night pretty much.
Right.
It's hard to see the characters, or they're shooting a day for night where everybody looks blue or something. No, this looks, whether it's done in a studio under completely controlled environment or whether they just flood the place with lights, it looks good. It looks pretty good.
Yeah, and just going back to give more summary of the movie for anybody who hasn't seen it, so spoiler if you want to watch it first. But it's about a meteor that crashes. Again, young high school couple out there, they see it. Oh, hey, let's go see if we can find it. Before they find it, an old man in the woods, he sees it too, goes out, takes a stick, and finds the meteor. And what do? You poke it because, well, that's what you do.
That's what you're supposed to do,
What's
right?
that? I don't know what it is. So you poke it, he pokes it, and then it opens up, and then this glob comes out, goes on the stick, and he's looking at it. We were joking around that maybe he was going to taste it because he's like, ooh, what's this? What's this? And then it jumps onto his hand. They bring him to the doctor so the doctor can look at him and try and figure out what it is. And as he's at the doctor's office, it slowly starts getting bigger and bigger because it's eating his hand and going down to his body. And then, of course, the doctor dies. The nurse goes.
The nurse is gone too.
And then the creature goes out into the town. And at that point, he's trying to convince the police department that he saw a monster. And everybody thinks, oh, you crazy kids. But he doesn't end up, Steven McQueen's character does convince his fellow students,
his 30-year-old teenage friends,
that, hey, he's right. If he saw a monster, there must be a monster. And that's what a lot of the movie is them trying to convince it, find it. And then, of course, they get the whole town out. The monster then attacks the theater, which is the most famous scene of the whole movie. Yeah. And the blob then goes over the diner. And in between there, they find out the weakness of it is cold because they tried to electrocute it. It tried to burn it. They threw acid and nothing would destroy it. So the end of the movie is they freeze it solid and it floats away with a helicopter and they drop it
in the Arctic,
hoping that it'll stay cold. And we all know with a big question mark that it would come back, which that's another podcast because we all hear that the second movie was a bomb.
Well, we'll talk about the sequel and the remix and all that stuff. But off the bat, one of the things I remember, because I had seen it before, but it probably had been a very long time. And watching it again now, one of the things I noticed off the bat, it's the pacing. There's something about the pacing. I mean, we are spoiled now in terms of the movies we watch. There is no silence. There is no pauses. Everything kind of moves pretty fast now. And this movie had so many moments where everything kind of slows to a grinding halt in terms of people talking, and it almost feels at certain times like, why are they bothering having these conversations with these people? These are unimportant characters. And that's how I felt in the beginning with the rest of the kids that he was drag racing with. It was like, who cares what these kids are doing? But later we find out that they are important in the story, because part of the, I guess if you want to call it the message, one possible message of the film that is that, you know, in order to defeat the Blob, they have to rely not just on the cops or the firemen. It's the kids who have to go out there searching for fire extinguishers in order to cool it down.
Right, and through the movie, the only people who believed the teenagers was the fellow teenagers. None of the adults really believed them. We'll just sort this out in the morning.
Yeah, it was a little
episode. They just let's all just go to bed and sleep on it.
Right, but it was also a little too much of both sides in terms of the adults were kind of like, whatever, we don't want to hear what you kids have to say. And the kids are like, they'll jump on anything for no reason whatsoever.
Yeah. Well, the father, I believe you, son, but we should still go to bed and think about it and talk about it in the morning. He believes him that there's a monster running around, but he wants to sleep on it and go to bed. And I know that's a little odd, but it's more the point, like I said, the protagonists weren't the kids. Actually, they were more the heroes.
And even the cops, they try to give you different flavors of cop. The lead cop is kind of somebody who's really trying to listen to both sides of the story. There was one cop who's supposed to be like a war vet, who's the guy's, he's on edge and he's all kind of, you know, he's angry at everyone, and it's like, no, he's the bad cop, or the angry cop. And then there's the other guy who's just playing chess all the time, who's like useless.
He's useless, yeah. And Dave, Captain Dave, or I think he's a captain, but Dave, who's in charge, you'll notice that too, they never really called him by lieutenant, sergeant. There was always, they called the cops all by their names.
It's
for
funny.
The most part.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember he would act like the boss, and there was the guy who seemed to always be challenging him, and I'm like, why doesn't he just put him in his place if he's the boss? And he was the boss.
He does. He
eventually,
says,
it's like,
yeah, you need to do this because I want you to help control the situation. But you also look at Dave's character from some of the comments. It was towards the end when the kids get the whole town out, and he says, well, look, Dave, you were wrong before. And so it's trying to, I guess, imply that, yeah, he's taking chances. He listens to people. He's not just, kids are crazy. They don't know what they're talking about. Let's just arrest them and throw them in jail. He tries to make decisions from what he's heard, and it has backfired in the past, and maybe something's happened. We don't know what,
right?
But it's just the point, hey, you were wrong once. Just remember that. And he goes, well, maybe not this time. And obviously, with the help of Steve McQueen, he was right.
Right. The other thing about this movie is that if you think about it in terms of what is the message that the movie's giving you, and by that I mean a lot of movies, specifically sci-fi horror films in the 50s, they all had a very subtle political message underneath that could be interpreted or read into. Just like The Thing from Another World, you know, had this political kind of undertones about them. This movie, some critics have theorized that, you know, it's a red blob and it could signify communism. You know, in the 50s, it's the spread of communism, this red blob that threatens to take over the world. And the fact that the only thing that was able to defeat the blob in the movie is the cold, you know, freezing it. These same people also think that the implication is that the Cold War, that you freeze the communist threat by engaging in a Cold War. So again, that's a theory of somebody who reviews the film, but there have also gone on record some of the writers, I think, or at least one of the writers who actually wrote the film, who said that it has nothing to do with any political overtones. There is no hidden message in the movie itself. It's just plain old sci-fi horror film. So, you know, you decide whether or not you can apply any kind of political undertones to this movie. Now, I mentioned earlier also, and again, this could be another one of these 50s things where if you want actors that are good or at least passable actors, you can't have very young actors because I guess at the time they didn't even have access to them, or they didn't exist, or they couldn't afford them maybe. But to me, one of the problems is that you have Steve McQueen, who looks to me like he's probably in his 30s, or maybe he just looks old. I don't know. Maybe he's a guy who always looked older than he was. But most of the kids in this thing look like they're older than they should. To me, I think they're supposed to be kind of like teenagers, high school kids. But they look like they're either in their late 20s or early 30s, which, again, it's nothing new, I think, for some of these older films. They just had older actors portraying a lot of characters that are supposed to be younger.
Right. I think that's just part of the film industry and who you're going to get. And it's a lot of local talent. I think they spent most of their money with Steven McQueen, having somebody with a little better resume.
I guess. I mean, I couldn't even tell you what his resume was at this point. There was a story, I believe we read, something about how the film, I think the budget was like, what was it, like $120,000 or $110,000?
Yeah, $120,000.
And it made like $4 million, which is amazing if you think about it in terms of how much of a return they got for this film. And Steve McQueen at the time, because he wasn't a superstar like he was later in the 60s and even the 70s, I believe they said they got him for $3,000. And he did have an option, I guess, when he was being hired to, instead of taking the $3,000, he would take a little less money and then take a percentage of the film. I don't know, 4 or 5% or something. And if you think about it, if he would have done that, he would have made a ton of money more than the $3,000 apparently that he made. But I guess it's one of those missed opportunities. Like, who the hell knew that this movie was actually going to, make some money? Now, let's talk a little bit about the special effects and the creature itself. I mean, the type of movie that this is, it's kind of a monster movie, if you will. Even though it's the monster is something that it's not your typical looking monster. In other words, you're not dealing with a giant lizard. You're not dealing with a giant rabbit. It's not your B movie cheap kind of creature. I don't know if they've ever made something like this before in terms of, have they tried to do a monster that is really a shapeless form of a monster. But in this particular case, you're dealing with, basically, by the time this thing is kind of moving around and eating people, it's a red, jelly-looking blobbish kind of thing, which I think originally they were going to call it the glob.
The glob, yeah.
And then they changed it to blob. But let's talk a little bit about how they made the special effects for it. How did they make this thing look gigantic with these sets? I think the key to it, the first thing about it that you noticed afterwards, is that it rarely really interacts in its full form with people. You see it moving around, you see it crawling and oozing through areas, but you never really see it touch somebody or absorb somebody. That's something that in the beginning of the movie you see it because it's very small and it's able to just absorb the old guy's hand and stuff. But throughout the rest of the movie, if you really pay attention, it never really absorbs anybody. The cop at the end of the movie says that it killed like 30 or 40 people. But you never see it.
Right. Well, that's one thing that makes it a little more creepy because you don't really see it. You see the mechanic under the car, and his feet shake because he got sucked in by the blob.
And that's one of those things.
You see the nurse, she knocks over the lamp, and then all of a sudden you don't hear anything.
Oh, the doctor, you see him with something, but you really can't tell because he's behind the curtain, the blinds. Now that's something you could say. Well, you could it's kind of like Jaws. You can kind of give them credit for something that maybe is an accident or a necessity. In other words, if you don't have the ability to do the special effects to have this thing actually eat somebody and show it that's believable, you don't show it. So then is it that you're not showing it because you cannot achieve that effect, or you're not showing it on purpose because it's one of those, leave it up to the imagination type of things. The less you show of the monster, the better. You show the monster at the end of the movie. You don't show them, you show little bits and pieces here and there. We don't know which way it is.
I think it's more of don't show it, because back then in the 60s, how would you have a real giant blobbish thing attack somebody and make it try to look good?
Well, especially since most of these shots, like you told me before we watched it, they're either still photos or miniatures. And tell us some of the tricks that you read about.
Yeah, there was a book, and I can't think of the gentleman's name. I actually got to meet the original Blob. There is a gentleman, a film historian and big fan. He went and purchased the Blob from the production company. And again, I'll have to search that. We'll get you the names at the end of the podcast. But there was a book that was put out It's about the making of the Blob, and he actually he actually went and interviewed all the people in the towns. The nice thing was Chiller Theater, or I can't think of one of the other conventions. Actually, was in Pennsylvania. Not a horror, sci-fi, classic movie. I got to meet the gentleman. He had some of the props from the Blob that he was able to purchase from them, and he's kept it. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the Blob going through, like in the movie theater, in the windows, he actually takes the silicone and they push it through. But they film it on a table, and since it's ooze, it's just silicone gel with red dye. They would put the camera one end and miniatures, and then they would tilt the table to make the Blob actually move.
They take advantage of the gravity to make the Blob move naturally.
Yeah. And then,
so that they film it sideways almost.
Right. And then you can reverse it to make it look like it's coming off something or going on. They did a lot of pictures of towns in the movie theater.
I noticed that it was one shot where it's like they show you like the stool in the diner and the Blob's coming through the door, and I'm looking at that stool and I'm like, the stool looks like it's
a postcard.
It's two-dimensional. There is no depth to it because I guess they just used a picture and they just pushed it through a hole in the picture.
And again, that's, you got to think of special effects. And back in the 60s, low budget, $120,000 wasn't a lot of money. Yeah, McQueen got $3,000, but a lot of stuff was filmed in location in Pennsylvania.
I mean, a lot of the stuff of it moving, it's interiors. So yeah, you could do some miniatures, and again, I think they couldn't go too crazy with miniatures. I imagine their most elaborate miniature must have been the movie theater scene.
I would think, yeah, between the movie theater
because the diner to me looked like a matte painting. It looked like more like with animation on top.
Right. Yeah, I don't think that was a miniature where they put the silicone on top. I think you're right. They put a painting, a matte painting, and filmed it. So
it's funny. It reminded me a little bit. We said earlier, we talked about Kingdom of the Spiders. That end shot of Kingdom of the Spiders, that matte shot of everything covered. That's what it kind of looked like. And I even mentioned while we were watching it that the animation they were using for the shot of the cop that shoots the
power line
and it electrifies it. To me, it looked like Forbidden Planet. It's that kind of old timey color hand drawn animation where you try to create kind of like a lightning effect or a sparking electrical effect on top of something that's already there. Why don't you also tell us, Mike, a little bit about the music? Now, let me first say something about the music, is that through the movie, you have a traditional 50s, I would say, both scary movie music and kind of like a happy-go-lucky kind of music that at certain points it just didn't really seem to fit. It was the valleys are green and the wind is blowing and everything is fine in the world, but it's supposed to be kind of like a creepy scene and it just didn't fit. And then you do have traditional scary music stuff, but tell us a little about the opening.
Well, yeah, the opening was title song, and after about 5 or 6 lines you can memorize it and it just keeps going. It's a fun little song, and I'm kind of wacky because I like the musical scores.
You think it's appropriate?
Well, no, because it doesn't match. It doesn't match the music in the film.
It sounds like a surf movie.
It's Burt Bacharach in its 60s. And you can see it's like this dun 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 dun. It's so happy.
It's you're driving in the coast, California driving type of surf music,
right? And it's beware of the blob, it creeps and leaps and slides and glides
like
across the floor,
like an animated Saturday morning show.
Around the doors,
sounding thing.
Plop. Beware of the blob, boop, and it just goes over and over and over. It's Burt Bacharach. It's funny. It's a fun little tune. It's happening, and then you get into Ralph Carmichael's score, which is more
those are the ones I was mentioning before,
where he's trying to build the suspense. So when you look at the opening song, to him it's like 2 different styles. So it does it work? Yeah, it works because it's just a fun little Burt Bacharach type tune compared to Carmichael. I happen to like the Carmichael score because he tries to create a mood and trying to make put you on end with some violin sounds, because again, the blob's creeping behind tables and things, and you don't know when it's going to come out. So, but it is a bizarre song.
Let's talk a little bit about where has this led to? Where has this, assuming that most people that are into heavy sci-fi horror type of stuff agree that this does kind of qualify as a classic in a way. And I couldn't really put my finger on it, and it's almost kind of like it works. I'm not sure why it works. I had issues with it, but it does work in terms of especially in my case, once you see the creature and once the creature is kind of running amok, that was my favorite part of the movie. I wasn't too crazy about the build-up and the looking around and trying to find the old man and where he lived and the little dog and this and the other. No, I liked it when they're actually running around chasing it and it chasing them type of stuff. But tell us now a little, Mike, about this event that they hold. They've been holding for a number of years now, celebrating the movie.
Oh, yeah. Every year on, I think it's Halloween weekend or Halloween night, they reenact what they do. It's called the Blob Fest. The theater that they use to film where all the people come running out is an actual theater in Pennsylvania in the town. Same as the Soup Market, I believe. They did a lot of filming on location. So the town embraced the fact that they're the part home creators of the Blob. So every year they have Blob Fest, and if you go on to YouTube, just type in Blob Fest 2011, 2012.
You'll see some footage.
13, they'll show you some footage. But every night they watch movies, and then they reenact the screaming crowds running out of the theater, which I always think would be cool to go and do. I know your wife wants to go with me.
Instead of the running of the bulls, the running of the victims?
Exactly. Instead of the running of the bulls, you get to run with the Blob.
The other thing I wanted to mention is also that there is actually an official sequel to this movie that came out years later that, you know, I was interested in seeing it, and just the trailer alone made me want to not see it. It's on YouTube. You guys can see the trailer. You guys can see the movie. It's on YouTube. Tell us about the sequel.
Well, it came out in 1972. It was called Beware the Blob.
Yeah.
Again, it's the Blob. I always remember Larry Hagman was in it. I don't remember what his complete role was, if he was the good guy or bad. And also Burgess Meredith. I always remember him. He was a hippie or drunk or something, but he's in there. But no, it's an early 70s horror flick, and it's another movie. Same thing. But I think it's somebody finds a piece of the Blob, because at the end of the movie we know it's been left in the Antarctic and it comes back to this town. It's in somebody's freezer. I think that's how it defrosts and it comes out. And I remember it kills a fly and it kills a little kitten and kills a guy sitting in his own chair. And it's the usual. You know, goes down, attacks everybody, and then at the end it goes into an ice rink, and they turn on the ice rink, and the cold freezes it solid, and it's great. Okay, we defeated the creature, and I always remember the ending is the cop is sitting there. Hey, look what we did! But they put all these bright lights for the cameras,
and it starts to melt.
And then
or
it
something?
starts melting, and the blob starts coming back out, and then they says, "Is it really the end?" or something like that.
I do not know how I remember that, because my mind wants to convince me I have not seen it. But I do remember that scene for some bizarre reason, so maybe I blocked it out or something. But again, from the little that I've saw recently, just by going on YouTube, the quality of this movie is more what I was talking about earlier, about how the original Blob looks like a really professionally shot film, as opposed to this other 70s schlocky, dark, rough, sloppy looking thing. It's the best way of describing it. It's almost kind of like, it's not even Kingdom of the Spiders quality type of material. At least there you have Shatner to keep you company. Now,
and then after that, you also had the remake in 1988.
But hold on a second. Let me ask you a quick question. I know it wasn't a sequel and related, but if this is a genre, if the blobbish looking monster is a genre, there was a movie called The Stuff in the 80s also, which I know it's not a blob, but it's a blob type of substance that eats people.
Wasn't it? But that was a weird.
I
remember watching it once, and it was something that oozed up out of the ground.
Wasn't it like a yogurt or something? A product that got into food or something?
Yeah, and then I always remember the guys, if something bubbles up out of the ground, they don't know what it is, but they start eating it, and it tastes good. And it's some kind of parasite.
Was it a comedy almost? A horror comedy? A black comedy or something? I don't know.
Yeah, we need the other Mike Conway here. He could tell us, because we always remember they started eating it, and it was like, oh, this tastes good. And then they put it into yogurt. And then it will like eat you from inside and take over your body. But that's why it's called The Stuff.
Right. It's an offshoot. I mean, again, I kind of categorize it as a genre offshoot, as I think nothing to do with The Blob. However, what Mike was starting to say is that they actually did make, I think in 1988 it was, a remake, an actual remake that was co-written by Frank Darabont from The Mist and Shawshank and Walking Dead fame currently. And it's a more traditional remake in terms of it's telling the story once again using very modern, for the time, effects. Now, the movie wasn't a hit or anything, And I recently rewatched it again, and it's really not that bad. I think the most interesting thing about the movie is the fact that it kind of tries to do three things. It tries to tell the original story, and for the most part, I would say 75% of the story is being told exactly like the original. You have the young, tough, kid with the girl sidekick and the friends that are kind of wacky out there, and the other thing it tries to do is, because it's 1988, this thing is being shot probably, I imagine, 87 or maybe 86. It uses traditional, if you want to call them, or typical 80s horror conventions. So you have special effects that are very 80s effects. Some of them look bad, some of them look great. As I complained before about how you never actually see the Blob interacting with people in the original, in this one, you actually see this thing interacting with just about everybody in a very gruesome, John Carpenter's The Thing type of effects. Very bloody and scary, shocking stuff.
Yeah, I always remember they had the Blob came out of the sink, out of the drain, and the guy was looking down, or like there's a clog, so you put his hand in and try and find it. And once the Blob in the remake grabs onto you,
sucks him in.
It sucks you in and pulls you in. A little blood might have squirted,
and then the whole thing spits out, into the ceiling, and it grabs onto the ceiling. And that's the thing. And then, because it's the 80s, they can do those effects. They can actually show you this thing jumping or spewing out of a drain into the ceiling of the room and hanging onto the ceiling and like throwing tentacles at people from there.
Right. And I was going to say, they had these little tentacles. That's how it would reach out and grab you. Yep. It just didn't have a big glob that just jumped on you. This had tentacles. Yeah. They showed it moving around.
It recreates a lot of scenes. In the beginning with the old man, the hobo who's walking around there. In this movie, this thing eats the guy it eats him. You actually see half the man not there anymore because this thing's been eating him. In the movie theater, it attacks the audience. It's grabbing people left and right and eating them up. There was a scene in the original where Steve McQueen goes into a telephone booth to make that phone call, and his friend makes it for him. When in this movie, there was a patron from a diner, I think it is, who goes into a telephone booth to call the cops because they're being attacked, and the Blob jumps on top of the telephone booth and starts to kind of dissolve its way into the booth, and it gets the woman in the booth. Again, very traditional. I don't know if you want to call it like Nightmare on Elm Street, but it's that kind of
But didn't you also have like one of the other bodies that was being digested?
Floating outside.
It was inside the Blob.
It's funny because in it you have the guy who played Dale from Walking Dead, who's an actor, I forget his name, he's just about in every single Frank Darabont film, and he plays the sheriff in the town.
I didn't realize that because I haven't watched the original Blob in a long time, but I remember a lot of it.
Yep.
But don't remember.
But what I was the thing I'm forgetting is that, as I mentioned, it like I said before, it follows the traditional Blob story. It goes and uses very modern effects for its time. But the third thing it does is it takes a left turn in the story. And this is something we didn't have in this one, and that is that the Blob in this movie now ends up being really a science experiment, a Department of Defense weapons experiment, which is really like some kind of a satellite that came back to Earth. And then you have all these scientists coming to kind of protect this Blob and recover it because it's part of their weapons
their weapons eyes.
So the town people now, especially your lead character, not only is he fighting the Blob, but he's also fighting these crazy scientists who want to kind of, I guess, eliminate the town in the process of capturing this Blob.
Right. It's usually the government against the people. Where the original movie was, no, it's a monster from outer space. Now it became, well, it's really the government is after you.
Right. They gave it a twist. And at the end of this one, just like these other ones have a twist ending, at the end of the more modern one, the 1988 one, you have the town priest who was hurt by it, but he's kind of psychologically kind of insane, and he grabbed a little bit of it that was crystallized and put it in a jar. And by the end of the movie, once they destroy the creature, I guess a couple of weeks later or months later, this preacher is preaching somewhere in the West
about God and sinning and how they come to get you.
It's the end of the world and blah blah blah. It's a typical stereotypical
he's got the
crazy
jar,
preacher.
and then there's the little blob moving around.
And it's moving. It's defrosted itself back to its gelatinous form, and there's your tricky little ending, which never happened. But I would say definitely see the first one. The first one is the classic. Skip the sequel. Completely skip that sequel unless you're really, really bored.
I'd have to watch it again. I haven't seen it in a long time.
And definitely watch the remake because, again, it's
a fun 80s.
What's funny about it is that it's already dated. It's 80s. And 80s stuff now, most of it is very 80s. It's very dated. Obviously not as dated as the 50s. But it's interesting. I think Kevin Dillon is the star, which at the time he was coming off of probably Platoon or something. And he was starting to kind of bubble up in terms of, he was trying to get some roles here or there. He never took off the way his brother did, but...
And the woman, Shawnee, I can't remember her last name. But another one, when you see her face going, you've been in a lot of
She's
movies
an 80s
in
person,
the 80s. A lot of the B movies, but it all works.
So we definitely recommend, in my case, these two films.
Yeah, and again, watching the original Blob is, to me, it's cool. Just search for The Making of the Blob, and you'll find the book about the whole process. And they said how Steven McQueen, he got paid, but during the day they did the filming. And I always remember reading in the book, and they said at nighttime he'd be hopping in his car, and be racing around the side roads in Pennsylvania, because we all knew he was very into, very interested in race cars, and that's why I think he did some of his own stunts in Bullet. I think he was also a professional driver at one time. So you could see back then where it was early in his career. And I think it was his first movie that he did that he was a starring role. So that's neat. The other thing is the old man that ends up having the blob on his hand was Olin Howland. He's another guy, when you look at him closely, you'll remember him from another classic movie, which we still have to do, was the 1954 Them. Mm-hmm. He was one of the guys in the psych ward. Make me a sergeant, charge me the booze. Make me a sergeant, charge the booze. Make me a sergeant, charge the booze.
I have no idea what he's talking about.
You have no idea, but that's in there. But it's the same actor. And I think this was one of his last roles that he did. So another fun thing that actually ties back to some of the original movies.
The film is also available in just about every format conceivable.
Blu-ray. Mike Conway said he's got the Criterion.
That's right. There's a Criterion version apparently on Blu-ray, which must look really good, and it must be packed, I imagine, with so many bonus features in terms of maybe making-ofs and interviews and that sort of thing. So that would be a great thing if anybody can get their hands on. We ended up watching it tonight from the internet, actually. I looked it up because I thought I had it on DVD. I didn't have it. So I started doing a search, and I found, just like you would, for example, on YouTube, sometimes they post entire movies. They didn't have the Blob, but I did a search for it. I ended up on a different website that played the whole movie for us in pretty good quality.
Yeah, according to Wikipedia, in 1988, it was released on Laserdisc.
Wow.
Then it went on to DVD in 2000. And in 2013 on Blu-ray, so it's only a year ago.
It's only a year. It's only about a year, a little over a year, yeah.
I'm going to have to track down the Criterion Blu-ray just to see exactly what's on there. Yeah, and hope to see there's other making of things just to look at. But again, I know the book is fun. I do have to find the picture. I cannot find my picture of me in the Blob. That was the first time I met a real movie monster. And yes, it still exists. It sits in a bucket.
It's in a jar,
He's in a giant bucket. I remember the gentleman had put a clear plastic or glass on top, and it's hermetically sealed. It won't dry out, and he brings it around to horror conventions and sci-fi conventions, especially on the East Coast. Was either Chiller, or again, there's another one, and I can't think of the other one. It was always in Butler, Pennsylvania, which I think it moved just outside of Pittsburgh. Huh. They do a show every year. He pops up over there, so there's always a chance you can find him on the tour, and the movie's fun. It's a fun movie to watch. Again, early Steve McQueen. It's done pretty well. It's done locally in Pennsylvania. You've ended up with Blobfest, sequels, fun little tunes to listen to. Overall, it's a lot of fun, and I recommend it. But I happen to like all the old classic movies.
That's right. And we will continue doing these classics every now and then. So until then, I want to thank, obviously, Mike for joining me today. Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome.
And I want to thank you guys for listening, and we will see you here next time at GeekFest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
Beware of the blob, it creeps and leaps and glides and slides across the floor, right through the door and all around the wall. A splotch, a blotch, be careful of the blob. Beware of the blob, it creeps and leaps and glides and slides across the floor, right through the door and all around the wall. A splotch, a blotch, be careful.
Make me start charge the booze.
I have no idea what he's talking about.